Good evening. I want to start tonight by asking you to add a person to your prayer list this week. Good friend of mine and a hero in preaching, Bill Watkins, who was here a couple of years ago for our Equip seminar, is having some issues and is in the hospital. Will undergo bypass surgery on Tuesday. And if you remember Bill, what a wonderful man, big heart. And please pray for him and for the surgery and that everything goes well. If you would, add him to your list for me. This lesson for tonight was actually originally planned for last week. Remember, we talked about marriage last Sunday morning, and so I intended to do this lesson in combination with that one. If you've been keeping up through the year, we're trying to kind of play off of what we're doing on Sunday morning into Sunday evening. I don't know if you've noticed that or not. We're trying to double up. And so I had planned all year for this to be the lesson to go along with the marriage lesson last week, but our seniors needed to be celebrated, and I'm glad we got the opportunity to do that. So we're moving it to this week. Hopefully you can remember what we talked about last Sunday morning. Hopefully you hadn't forgotten it already, and we can play off of that. You know, your first year of marriage is more than likely different than, say, your 7th year of marriage. For instance, the way you can tell that is by how you treat your spouse when they're sick. The first year that you're married, the husband might say, "Honey, I'm really worried about you, baby girl. You've got the sniffles pretty bad, so I'm going to take you to the emergency room and get you well because I can't stand to see my baby sick." Year 2, the husband might say, "Listen, darling, I don't like the sound of that cough. I called the doctor and asked if I could bring you in. I just want to be sure that it doesn't get worse." Year 3, "Maybe you should lie down, honey. I'll bring you some soup." Year 4, "Now look, honey, you need to take care of yourself. After you feed the kids and do the dishes, you probably just need to go and lie down." In the 5th year, if he lived, in the 5th year, the husband says, "Why don't you take some aspirin?" In the 6th year, "I wish you'd gargle or something instead of sitting around all evening barking like a seal." And in the 7th year of marriage, the husband might say, "Good grief, stop sneezing. Are you trying to give me pneumonia?" Maybe you've never accused your spouse of barking like a seal, but my guess is it's only natural that over time, maybe things change somewhat. From year 1 to year 7 to year 10, 15, 20, whatever it may be. I don't have to tell you that no marriage is perfect. In fact, marriage involves people, and wherever you have people, you have problems. The only thing perfect in a marriage are the wedding photos, and they've probably been airbrushed, right? And so when you talk about marriage, and you talk about a Christian marriage, you're doing it a great disservice if you expect it to be perfect. Not even a Christian marriage is going to be perfect. But I think the Bible gives us some guidelines, and I think there are some things in God's Word that can show us how we can have a beautiful marriage even though it's not perfect. One thing we have to understand is that God designed marriage. And if God designed it, then we are at our best in our marriage if it functions the way the divine architect intended. When we follow the divine blueprint for marriage, we may not have a perfect marriage, but we can still have a successful marriage. And sadly, as you all know, not all marriages are thriving. There are people that perhaps have never even considered divorce. They're not living on the brink of divorce. They're just living as roommates rather than soulmates. There are married couples that have decided that they're going to stay together for the kids, and so they don't talk about divorce. There are married couples that, for whatever reason, logistically, they've decided not to get divorced, but they're not living a happy, successful marriage. Is this what God intended? That as long as you stay together, it's okay? As long as you are attached, then it's fine. I don't believe that's what God intended. I don't believe that's a faithful marriage. I've had people say to me, "Well, I've been faithful to my wife for 30 years. I've never cheated on her." That doesn't mean you've been faithful. Yes, maybe you've never committed adultery, but have you been faithful? Not necessarily, right? There are a lot of things involved in being faithful in a marriage. And so many times people are not having a successful marriage and not living out a faithful marriage because they've never really considered what the divine architect has to say about the subject. Like we said a couple of weeks ago when we talked about marriage, we said that, so many times it's not the divorce rate that we need to be looking at. It's the fact that people are entering into marriage without giving a thought about what God expects. We're focusing on marriages falling apart when we should be proactive in looking at what it means to enter into holy matrimony to begin with. And so here's some things that I hope you'll remember. First of all, marriage is God's design, not man's. Therefore, it must function as He designed it. This means that selfishness cannot win out. I don't think you can have divorce without selfishness, either on one or both parties' part. Secondly, understand that a successful marriage doesn't just happen by accident. It takes work. You've got to make it a priority. It's not something that you can just put on cruise control and expect to go well. Third, you must make marriage a priority. Don't wait until things are so bad or they're about to fall apart before you do something. It used to really bother me when I was a younger minister and couples would come into my office and their marriage was falling apart, and I felt so bad that I couldn't seem to help them. I mean, so many times people still will come into my office and they'll talk to me about their marriage, and I'm sitting there thinking, I don't know what to do. I really don't have an answer. And that used to really bother me until I started thinking about it, and it still bothers me, but I think about it and I think, these folks are coming in when everything's about to fall apart. They brought it to this point and they're bringing it to me to fix. I can't do that. I don't think anybody can do that, right? I'm their last-ditch effort. Instead of making it a priority all along, instead of being proactive and saying, we're going to make our marriage a priority. We're going to put the emphasis on what matters, investing the time and effort. Fourth, forgive. How difficult that is, right? Forgive. Be willing to say that I'm not going to be a history buff. I'm not going to remember all your past shortcomings and failings and bring them up every time we have an argument. The one that keeps score in a marriage is always going to be winning. But I think sometimes we fail to realize that we have our own problems and shortcomings as well. And so don't be expecting more from your spouse than what you're currently doing. Don't expect them to live up to a standard that you're not currently living up to. Paul said, love is patient, love is kind, and is not jealous. Love does not brag and is not arrogant, does not act unbecomingly. It does not seek its own, is not provoked, does not take into account a wrong suffered, or is not a record keeper of wrongs. Don't be a record keeper. Forgive and move on. And finally, please understand that staying in love is a choice. It drives me crazy when people say, well, I just fell out of love with him. You don't fall out of love. You don't fall in and out of love. It doesn't work that way. Agape love is not something that's a feeling that you chase. Agape love, the love of the Bible, is a love you choose. And you choose to stay in love. You choose to stay in the relationship. And so do whatever needs to be done, but don't offer up the lame excuse that you've fallen out of love. Agape love is an action that we take. And therefore, we should strive to fall in love over and over again with our spouse. I always get a little nervous preaching on marriage because I'm thinking my wife's over there going, yeah, you don't do that. I mean, hopefully she's not keeping score. So we've laid those ground rules. So now let's go a little bit further. And let's ask the question, why do some people in your neighborhood have a nicer yard than you do? I mean, you look at a yard down the street or across the street and you say, wow, their yard looks really nice. Why? Why do some cars last longer than others? Or why do some people seem to live healthier lives than others? I mean, it's all about maintenance, isn't it? I mean, if you're working at something and you're maintaining it, it's probably going to last longer, right? People have a nicer yard because a lot of times they work harder at it. People have a better marriage because a lot of times they work harder at it. It's all about maintenance. Are we willing to dig in and do the hard work of maintaining a marriage? When we were living in Cassville, Missouri, one of our elders was the CEO and founder of a bank in town, and they had gotten a Ford Explorer as a repossession. and they sold it to us at a bit of a bargain. But the reason why it was repossessed, obviously, is because the young lady that bought it wasn't making the payments. But when they got it back from her, they had to put a new engine in it because she didn't realize you had to change the oil. Regular maintenance, simple maintenance. But oftentimes the simple is overlooked. We don't take time to do the necessary things to maintain a proper marriage. A major cause of a failing or mediocre marriage is a lack of pursuit. Remember when you and your spouse first met? Guys, you remember when you first saw your future wife? And what did you think to yourself? If you're Steve Brown, you thought, I'll never get her anyway, so not even worth trying. I don't know how you did, Steve, but great job. But we looked at our spouse and we said, I'm going to do whatever it takes to win her, whatever it takes. And so you had this giddiness and this feeling of butterflies in your stomach, and every time the phone rang, you thought it might be her, and you ran to pick it up. Ladies, what did you think the first time that you saw the man of your dreams that you're now married to? I mean, you probably had that giddiness, that excitement again, right? But you thought, I got to get to know this guy better. Maybe you wrote him little notes here and there. You called him out of the blue just to say, I love you. Guys, maybe you sent her flowers for no reason. What happened to that guy? Or what happened to that girl? You know, we get married, and guys, we feel like we've caught our limit. There's no need to try now, right? She's hooked. She can't go anywhere. Or ladies, we feel like, I mean, it is what it is. We're married now. We have kids, got a job. I mean, I don't have time to put in the effort like I did before. Life gets in the way, right? I would say that a lot of the problems in a mediocre marriage, or maybe even a failing marriage, comes from the fact that we're not persistently pursuing our spouse. Why are you not striving to meet the needs of your spouse the way you did when you were first dating? I mean, where has that initial courtship gone? And as I ask those questions, maybe you're thinking defensively, and maybe you're going, well, Chris, I mean, this is just how it is. This is what happens. I mean, you get married, you start having kids, and you just don't have time for one another anymore. But that shouldn't be the case. Again, it takes work, doesn't it? A key component to a healthy marriage is persistently pursuing one another. The word pursue means to strive to gain or to seek to attain or accomplish. In relation to what we're talking about this evening, it means a conscious and consistent of doing things for our spouse that they appreciate. Persistence is described as lasting or enduring tenacity. It means constantly repeated. One of the easiest ways to kill your marriage is to stop pursuing your spouse, to just give up and say, it is what it is. The lot that we're at in life is what it is, even though it's mediocre. Maybe we're not on the verge of divorce, but hey, it is what it is. We'll just be business partners. We'll just be roommates, and we'll just make do. Pursue your spouse. And I would say this, pursue your spouse as hard to keep them as you did to win them. Proverbs 18:22 reads, he who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. We asked this a few weeks ago when we were talking about marriage. Are you trying to please God in your marriage? Is that a goal for you? Do you seek to please God in the way that you treat your spouse? Are you striving to live out what God has commanded for married people to live out? When it comes to a marriage, we're talking about a three-way affair. You've got God, and then you've got you and your spouse. God is at the center, and you're married to Him first. And so if you're persistently pursuing God, then you're persistently pursuing your spouse, hopefully, and it trickles down. In the first surgical procedure ever performed, God took a rib from Adam's side and He fashioned woman. And the reason He did that is because Adam was sitting there as all the animals were paraded before him, and as He named them, He did not find one of them that was like him, that was a helper suitable. And so woman was fashioned for the purpose of completing him, for having a helpmate. Women, love your husband enough to let him lead, to love and encourage him. Obviously, when we talk about submission or subjection, like it says in Ephesians 5, we're not talking about acting like a trained puppy. If that is the way your husband treats you, he's not being biblical. He is not honoring God's covenant of marriage. But rather, be a support. Be a helpmeet. Be there for him. The Bible says that the husband is to love his wife as Christ loved the church. How much did Christ love the church? Enough to die for it. And so, men, we love our wife enough that we're willing to die for her, to protect her, to sustain her. And women, we love our husband enough to be his biggest fan. If he had a fan club, we'd be the president, right? And we are right there along beside him, letting him lead, encouraging him, maybe even stepping in and playing referee at some point, right? Maybe we have to step in and say, honey, we can't do that. Maybe we're the voice of reason at times, wives. But being an encourager, allowing him to lead, and men leading as God leads, leading as Christ leads the church. Proverbs 5:18 says, let your fountain be blessed and rejoice in the wife of your youth. Unfortunately, many men are not rejoicing in the wife of their youth. No, they're taking the wife of their youth for granted. They're using the wife of their youth. Many are compassionless and uncaring toward the wife of their youth. And many women no longer rejoice in their husbands. They are critical of him. They have ignored his needs. They have sacrificed for the kids while giving him what is left over. And we ask the question, is that pleasing to God? And I think we know the answer. Again, some of you may be thinking defensively and saying, well, if he would just chip in, or, if she would just show me some respect. Again, we can look at this from two different perspectives, from a selfish perspective or a selfless perspective. And if we both seek the highest good for one another, and ultimately what God would have for us in a marriage, it's not perfect, but it can be successful. A woman was frustrated that her husband kept saying that there was no spark in their marriage. And she said, I'll show him. I'll give him a spark. When he's asleep, I'm going to tase him. And then when he wakes up, I'm going to say, do you still feel that way? And folks, I'm here to tell you there's a lot better, less painful ways to get the spark back in your marriage instead of just tasing your husband. And one of the surefire ways, I believe, is keeping the courtship alive. Whatever you did in the beginning, continue doing. I tell couples in premarital counseling all the time to spend as much time planning the future of your existence together as you do for the wedding. Because so many couples plan for the wedding, but they don't plan for the marriage that follows. And the wedding day is a monumental day. It's a great day, and it's a day that you will probably remember for the rest of your lives, but it shouldn't even be the greatest day of your marriage. It should be one day in a long line of great days that you enjoy with one another. Don't do all of your planning on the front end and not consider the marriage that is to follow. The last thing you should want to convey to your spouse is that all of those romantic efforts that you gave in the beginning were only for the purpose to get you, to hook you, to get you to marry me. Don't convey that message. Show your spouse that you're just as in love with them today as you were when you first met them. Continue to do the things that it took to win them. And you're thinking, well, what kind of things? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I've got some here. First of all, take stock in your appearance. Guys and girls alike, you may have to do the best with what you got, right? We get older, and our bodies change, our looks change, but that still is no excuse to not at least try to be as attractive as possible to our spouse. Do the best with what you got. Continually strive to draw your spouse's eye. Secondly, know your spouse's triggers. I think most of us know the button we can push to set our spouse off. When we're having an argument, we know that one thing that we can say that's going to put an end to the argument and cause them to stomp off mad. Know their triggers in a positive light, in a good way. Know the things that touch their heart. Men, send flowers for no reason. Send a text. Give your wife a call. Drop by the office just to say hi. Ladies, do the same thing. Send a text. Just tell them, I love you out of the blue. Guys, do the laundry. Unload the dishwasher or load the dishwasher. And if you don't know what that is, your wife will show you. Do some things that maybe are out of the ordinary or out of character at times. You know, I've come to believe that one of the most romantic things that we can do as men is maybe vacuum or maybe unload the dishwasher or load the dishwasher or do some laundry. You know, I say this in premarital counseling too. You know, men are microwaves and women are crock pots. And they just are. You know, when it comes to romance and things like that, it's a buildup with women. With men, it's not so much. But understanding that we are different and knowing the triggers. Talk to each other. You know, the key to selling real estate, I'm told, is location, location, location. The key to a successful marriage is communication, communication, communication. Talk. Do you have a wife that says, my wife does this, do you have a wife that, men, when you come home, she says, so how was your day? And you go, fine. We've sold that short, hadn't we? Because she was wanting more of an answer. Talk to your spouse. If she's genuinely asking about how your day is, talk to her. And really listen on both sides. Men and women, listen to what your spouse is saying. There's a difference in acknowledging and hearing. Really hear what they're saying. Take a vested interest in what they're telling you. Sometimes it may be that they just want to come home and vent a little bit. They don't need an answer or anything like that. They just need somebody to vent to, an ear that will listen. And that's okay. Exercise what James calls verbal diplomacy. I like that word. Verbal diplomacy. Understand that you can speak without speaking. That your body language says something as well. Pay attention to all those things when you communicate. And also, seek deeper conversation. This one's hard for guys. Remember that in order to really develop a relationship, there's got to be really good communication. And if you ever read the book, His Needs, Her Needs by Willard Harley, it's a book that I require for reading in premarital counseling. If you ever read that book, you know that it lists the top 5 needs for a man and the top 5 needs for a woman. And if you look at those lists, those top 5 needs, they're very different. Some of them have the same thing, but they're different. They're ordered different. And one of the top things for a woman is communication. And so we can look at it selfishly and we can say, well, you're not meeting my number 1 need or you're not meeting my number 3 need, instead of saying, you know what can I do to meet those 5 needs for her or him? If both of us take that approach, I think we ensure a successful marriage. And then here's another one. Pray for one another. Who is praying for your spouse on a regular basis? Who's doing that? If not you, then who? So pray for your spouse on a regular basis. Otherwise, nobody may be praying for them. Pray for them in private. Pray for them in public. Pray for them in front of them. Thank God for your spouse. Pray for his or her well-being. Pray for their spiritual livelihood. Pray that you can glorify God in your marriage. Just pray for your spouse. Because if you're not, then who's going to? And remember this, Revelation chapter 2, starting in verse 2. I know your deeds and your toil and perseverance, and that you cannot tolerate evil men, and you put to the test those who call themselves apostles, and they are not, and you found them to be false, and you have perseverance and have endured for my name's sake and have not grown weary, but I have this against you, that you have left your first love. Therefore remember from where you have fallen and repent and do the deeds you did at first, or else I am coming to you and will remove your lampstand out of its place unless you repent. The church in Ephesus was doing right things, but they were going through the motions. Those things didn't have meaning because they had lost their first love. There was the motivation that was supposed to be behind those things was a love for God, but they had lost that love. And I think we can make an application here to marriage. I think in too many marriages we have lost our first love. And I'm not talking about going back to the days when we were giddy and we were excited and we had those butterflies. I'm talking about our first love for God. I think too many times we've lost our first love in marriage, and I'm talking about God. We've not given God the proper place in our marriage. And so we're not persistently pursuing God, and therefore we're not persistently pursuing our spouse. And I think many times in a failing marriage, you can look at it, not always, but a lot of times you can look at a failing marriage and you can say, where is God? And He's not in the proper place. Don't lose your first love. Make sure God is at the top. Make sure He is at the center of that marriage. It all starts with pursuing God. Pursue Him first and let it trickle down. As I've said so many times, you get God right, you get everything right. And the key to a successful marriage is glorifying God in your marriage. It troubles me to think how many times we gather together on Sunday, just here at Oldham Lane, but in all of our churches, and so many people are here as married couples. Maybe they're here without their spouse, maybe they're here with their spouse, and they're going to go home to a war zone. Their house is going to be anything but peaceful and godly. For whatever reason, their marriage is falling apart. And I believe as the family goes, so does our society, so does the church. So if we can help you tonight, maybe you don't want to answer the invitation by coming forward. Maybe you want to come to me or one of the elders later and set up a time that you can come by and talk. Then certainly let's do that. Or maybe you do want to come forward and just ask for the prayers of this church family. Then we can certainly do that. Or maybe you're living in a marriage that is fine and good. It's not on the brink of divorce, but you're just going through the motions. And it's time to pursue that first love again. And you need some help with that. We want to help you tonight, whatever needs you might have. As we say every week, don't leave here without being right with God. Come now as we stand and as we sing.